Believe we're live. So hello, everyone, and welcome to another webinar series. My name is Aaron Essery. I am the State Extension Specialist for Viticulture and Enology here at Oklahoma State University. And today we're going to talk about wine fining agents, also known as wine clarifiers. So we will begin. So why fine wine? Why do you clarify wine? There's a few reasons. One is to soften the astringency and bitterness. Another reason is to remove protein haze, to reduce unwanted color, and also to remove off odors or even unmask other aromas that might be hidden. A fining agent, so you do all this with fining agents, and a fining agent will react with the wine either chemically or physically to form a new complex that is then separated from the wine. So when you put a fining agent into wine, what it does is it binds with the phenols or the proteins that you're trying to remove. And then that new macromolecule will drop out of solution and you rack off of it or filter from it. And that's how you clarify your wine. So some common wine fining agents, and all of these we will cover today: isinglass, bentonite, gelatin, casein, chitosan, Chitosan, egg whites, carbon, and one called polyvinyl polypyrrolidine. I'll say it again, it's polyvinyl polypyrrolidine. I'm pretty sure that's the correct pronunciation, but most people just call it PVPP. You'll know the plus or minus charges beside each of these finers, and that is its chemical charge that the finer carries. And that's extremely important because when it comes to wine finers, you really need to know the charge. A fining agent works because it's chemical charge. See, basic chemistry here. There's positive charges, there's negative charges. Sometimes there's a neutral charge where it has no charge, but for the most part, it's positive or negative. A positively charged finer binds to negatively charged molecules, and a negatively charged finer will bind to positive proteins. And you see the little animation or a little picture down at the bottom. You know, if you use bentonite, which is negatively charged, you're gonna pull out positive proteins. That's gonna happen 100% of the time. If you're using something like isinglass, which is positively charged, and you're trying to remove proteins, it won't happen because they're both positively charged. It's chemically impossible. So the chemical charge in the finer and the chemical charge of the phenols you're trying to remove, you have to know those because that's how these finers works. In chemistry, opposites attract. So you use a finer with one charge, you're going to remove phenols or proteins with the other charge. And just so you know, proteins are always positively charged. If it's a protein, it carries a positive charge. And that's easy to remember for me because it's P and P. Protein P, protein positive, positive charge. So proteins are always positive, just FYI. So know what you are fining for. Again, you got to know what you're trying to pull out of your wine. If you want to remove bitterness or astringency, you will likely use either casein or gelatin or isinglass, egg whites, or PVPP. If you're trying to remove protein haze, remember proteins are positive. So I'm going to use a negative finer. I'm going to use bentonite or Chitosan. Color compounds. You can actually remove color compounds with carbon or PVPP. And then heat stability, that's really not I guess a clarifier, but if you're using bentonite, you make your wine heat stable. Just FYI, we'll cover that a little bit in detail. The compounds in wine. So catechins, I think that's how you pronounce it. Catechins, they're polyphenols in wine. They're responsible for bitterness and they carry a negative charge, you see. So if I'm trying to remove bitterness, I'm going to fine with a protein. And then also if I have proteins in solution, those are positively charged, I'm going to use a negative finer. And then color compounds, anthocyanins, those actually carry a positive charge most of the time. And you can remove color using finers as well. Now, what's tricky and sometimes is these anthocyanins will bind to catechins, or the anthocyanins will bind to tannins or other polyphenols and have an overall negative charge, you see. So that's how sometimes you can remove color using a protein because the color compound is sometimes bound to something else. You know, but for the most part, the color molecule itself is usually positively charged. Okay. So the different wine finers. We'll start with isinglass. Isinglass is positively charged. It is derived from the swim bladder of fish. So isinglass is it comes from fish. It's a protein. Isinglass is mostly used in white wine. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me back up. Please mute yourself if you're just coming in. Okay. Isinglass, positively charged, derived from the swim bladder of fish. Mostly used in white wines. It will remove bitterness and help unmask other fruit aromas. Isinglass binds to smaller phenols and is pretty gentle on the wine. So as we cover these finers, some of these wine clarifiers are very aggressive, some are very gentle. Isinglass is less aggressive than most, but it's a good one to use. I've used isinglass before. It will pull out, bitterness compounds and things like that. And it's fairly gentle on the wine. So isinglass, this is what it is. Next finer, gelatin. Gelatin is a protein as well. It is positively charged and it is derived from animal tissue. I think it still comes from fish, but it's a whole lot more than just the swim bladder, I think. Gelatin is mostly used at pressing or post-fermentation to remove astringency, bitterness, and even color. It will react with larger polyphenols, and in gelatin is a much more aggressive finer. It is easy to overfine using gelatin. So isinglass is fairly gentle on the wine. Gelatin is very aggressive. And what I mean by aggressive is that it will pull out a lot of stuff from solution. Even things you don't want to pull out, if it'll bind to it, it can pull it out. The thing with gelatin too, though, is it is soluble in wine. And what that means is that if you have too much of the gelatin, let's say you overdosed on gelatin, it will then dissolve into the wine, and now you have protein in the wine. You have more protein. So careful using gelatin. Down below is a little picture again. You got a tank of wine or a tank of juice. You have some, phenols floating all in there you don't want. You just put the fish gelatin in there. It slowly goes to the bottom and it pulls out all those negative phenols it can. But again, if you have any left over that didn't bind up, it will just dissolve in wine, and now you have more protein in your wine. And to remove that, you have to chase it with another finer. You see, so if you have a lot of protein in your wine, you might have to come back with bentonite or Chitosan and clear that out. So if you're at crush and you have some juice you think's already kind of funky off the bat, has some foxiness in there, hitting it with a good dose of gelatin might be a way to drop all of that out of solution. Just, FYI. So gelatin, aggressive finer, animal protein. Bentonite. This is one we all know and love, and I have used in every cellar I've ever worked in. Bentonite is negatively charged. It is a fine clay material composed of aluminum silicate, and it removes proteins. So bentonite, negatively charged, will remove protein haze from wine. The proteins bind with this clay and fall out of solution, and then you just rack off of it. It is mostly used in white wines, but it can be used in red wines, but it may absorb color. So remember the anthocyanin color compound is usually positively charged. Bentonite's negatively charged. So if you use it in red wine, you might pull a little color out, but you can still use it in red wines as well. Bentonite makes the wine heat stable, and I'll talk more about that at the end. When you remove protein haze from the wine, you're heat stabilizing your wine. And so if you're using bentonite, you're going to make it heat stable. That's just an added benefit. The cool thing about bentonite is that it's mined from the earth. The picture there on your left is just a mountainside composed of bentonite clay, and companies will go out, mine the clay, maybe refine it just a little bit, put it in a baggie and sell it. I think that's really neat. I mean, it's an organic, naturally occurring compound that's mined from the earth, and it's used to fine wine. So wine is grown in the vineyard, bentonite is mined from the earth. You put the two together and you got fine wine. I think it's pretty cool. Okay, chitosan. Chitosan is positively charged. It is a polysaccharide derived from shellfish, and it will remove metal anions from solution, iron, cadmium, copper. For those of you who didn't know, you actually have iron and copper in your wine. Yes, like every wine contains copper or iron to some extent. And that happens because those elements are pulled from the earth by the grapevine, are pushed into the berry during development and ripening. And then you pick the grapes, you smash them, you turn them into wine. Well, that element has been in there the whole time. And so you have iron and copper in your wine. And chitosan will help remove some of that. I don't think I've ever used chitosan before, but just looking it up and reading about it, this is what it does. It will also help inhibit Brettanomyces and other microorganisms, mostly used in red wine, and it is a bit more aggressive than isinglass. So just to kind of anchor back to isinglass, isinglass is fairly gentle, gelatin is extremely aggressive, and chitosan is somewhere in between. So that is chitosan. Chitosan. This is one I've never used as well, but just looking it up. Chitosan is negatively charged and is composed of silicon dioxide. Just to jump back 2 slides, bentonite, composed of aluminum silicate. So bentonite has silicone in it. Chitosan has silicone in it, silicon dioxide. So both of those carry a negative charge. They have silicone in them. So if that means anything to you, it helps remove haze and cloudiness from wine. And Chitosan is pretty gentle on the wine. It's fairly gentle. I think it's more gentle than bentonite. But the thing with Chitosan is it will not easily drop out of solution. So if you find your wine with Chitosan, you will have to chase it with chitosan, which we just covered. So Chitosan is negatively charged, and it will bind to proteins, but it won't always drop out of solution. So if it binds up, you have to chase it with chitosan, which will then attach to the Chitosan haze complex, and then it drops out of solution and you rack it from that. And companies know this, and they will sell you a dual pack of both Chitosan and chitosan. So if you think you just want to clean your wine up a little bit, you don't want nothing too aggressive, maybe use Chitosan, maybe chase it with chitosan, and that should work for you. Egg whites. This is a fun one. Yes, literal egg whites, like from your fridge or from the hen house. Egg whites are a protein, and that means they're positively charged. So you can use egg whites to remove harsh astringency in red wine. It's pretty neat. I've seen this done once in a cellar. You literally crack eggs into a plate, you cut out the yolk, and you just dump them into your barrel. And those egg whites will just settle in the barrel. It'll pull out some astringency, and then you just rack out of your barrel. You can't use the yolk though, so don't use the yolk. You have to cut out the yolk, but you literally crack open an egg, remove the yolk, and then put the whites into your tank or your barrel in this case, and it will help remove some astringencies in red wine. And then again, you have to rack off of it. Don't forget that. But I just think that's neat. Literal egg whites. So isinglass, gelatin, chitosan, they're all animal proteins. Well, I mean, an egg is, I guess, an animal protein as well, and it can be used to clarify your red wines. Casein. So another protein. Casein is positively charged and is the principal protein in milk. Casein will help remove bitterness and browning from wine, and it is much gentler than isinglass. Because it's so gentle, it does have limited clarifying action. So if you have a wine that's probably ready to go, you think this wine is good, I like it, it's ready for bottling, but it has a bite that I just don't like, maybe hit it with a little bit of casein, and that will hopefully clear up your bitterness or your browning, you know, if you're trying to remove some color as well. The common form is potassium caseinate, and that's just what it looks like. It's a white, you know, milk protein. I don't think I've ever used casein, but just reading about it, looking it up, very gentle on the wine. Well, has limited clarifying action for that reason because it's so gentle, but this is probably one to use during the aging or pre-bottling process. Activated carbon. This is a kind of a neat one. It's essentially charcoal. I mean, it's activated carbon, activated charcoal. It is negatively charged and is highly porous and carbon rich. It absorbs many different phenols and organic compounds, and it will remove odors and color. Carbon is an extreme severe finer. So carbon will strip your wine really good. Like it will find a lot of things. It will pull out good stuff. It will pull out bad stuff. It will pull out everything. It is a very aggressive finer. I did, when I was at A&M, I did just some lab trials with some activated carbon in our enology lab, just playing around. And one of the wines, I gave it a huge dose of carbon, and it come out clear. Like carbon will really strip your wine. It'll overfine it. So if you decide to use activated carbon, just know a little carbon goes a long way. But it's good for cleaning up wine. All right. Polyvinyl polypyrrolidine, also known as PVPP. This is a synthetic polymer. It absorbs polyphenols such as catechins and anthocyanins. And I was reading, I don't think it carries a charge. I could be wrong, and if somebody knows, please tell me. But I think PVPP is neutral. I don't think it has a charge at all because it is a synthetic polymer. It's made in a lab. You know, it's synthetic. It's mostly used in white wines to remove pinking and astringency. And it's relatively gentle on the wines too. It's not a very extremely aggressive finer. You know, it will clear up your wines, but it's not crazy aggressive. But it's also very effective when used in conjunction with carbon. So if you put put some PVPP in your wine, add a little bit of activated carbon, it'll clean your wine up pretty good. It will also brighten the color of red wine. I think that's neat. It'll just give it like a brighter hue, you know. So if you have a dull red wine, maybe hit it with some PVPP, it'll just brighten it up, make it look more red, I suppose. And down below is the PVPP molecule and what it looks like in the raw form. All right, so when to use these fining agents? Really, anytime. You can use them anytime during the winemaking process. Generally, anytime post-fermentation. I mean, from pressing to racking to aging. You can use them at pressing as well if you're trying to clarify some juice. Again, maybe you got some grapes that have a foxiness to them, and it's like I just need to drop all of this out of solution. Press it, use a heavy aggressive finer, drop all that out of solution, and then rack off of that, and then ferment. You know, that's a good way to get a nice clean white wine. You can use these finers between rackings. So maybe the wine has been made for a couple months now and it's sitting in a tank. You can drop a finer in the top, let it settle down, rack off of it, put it in a new tank, maybe do it again. So we use them in between rackings. You can even fine wine while aging. Again, the red wine in the oak barrels. So if you've got a wine that's maybe a year old or 16 months, and it's like, oh, it's got a little bit of something to it, I don't like it. You can fine during the aging process. And then even pre-bottling, you can find your wines, find a gentle clarifier. If before you bottle, you're like, this wine is pretty good, but I think it would be a little bit better if it had less of this, less of that. You can even find at pre-bottling. So anytime, you can really find anytime during the winemaking process. Just know what you're fining for and what you're trying to remove. Those are the biggest things. Some finers are used in the juice phase, like I just mentioned, especially for whites and rosés. If you want to remove a lot of stuff in the beginning, use them during the pressing phase. And then again, just during pressing to remove a lot of leaves. So it's up to you. It's stylistic. As the winemaker, you just have to decide, do I want this in my wine? Do I not want this in my wine? I just go from there. Dosage. So yes, how much do you use? Well, it depends on the finer. Some of these finers require bigger dosage than others. I don't want to give any exact numbers because I just don't want to be held liable like that. But the manufacturer will always have a recommendation, whether it be, I don't know, 5 grams hectoliter, 5 grams per liter. Just follow the manufacturer's recommendation and always start with small scale trials. This is a big one. Always, instead of trying to find 500 gallons at once, pull out a quart, find a quart, scale it down. So like if the manufacturer says this requires 10 grams for 100 gallons, pull out a quart of wine or half a liter of wine, scale it down, find that, and then go from there. So always start with small scale trials, see what you like, and you may overfine it. You may pull out half a liter, put a gram of finer in there and it pulls too much out. You're like, whoa, that's too much. I'm glad I did a small scale trial. Always do small scale trials when it comes to finding wine. figure out what you like, and then just simply scale it from there. That's the safest, smartest way to do it. And again, don't overfine. Overfining is when the good stuff gets removed from the wine. Your good aromas, your good mouthfeels, your color, pleasant aromas become muted because you pulled out the good aromas. Color becomes stripped. Your wine becomes pale because you pulled too much color out. And even mouthfeel will become lacking. That bitterness you try to remove, you remove too much of it, and now the wine has no body. So just be careful when using these finers. And again, always start with small bench trials and low dosages first. If the manufacturer recommends this much, maybe just start with half that much. You can always pull more out later. It's really hard to put stuff back in, so be careful, don't overfine, small scale trials, low dosage, see what you like, and then go from there. So heat stability and cold stability. I talked about this with bentonite for heat stability. I might as well cover both. These aren't really fining methods, but it is a way to, especially cold stability, pull tartrates out of solution. So cold stabilization. For those of you who ever done this or haven't done this, or maybe you don't know about it, you can cold stabilize your wine. And what that entails is essentially chilling your wine to just below freezing, about 30 Fahrenheit or -1 Celsius for many days to a couple weeks. You can even go as many as 3 or 4 or 6 weeks if you wish. When you get the wine cold like that, what you're doing is you're dropping potassium bitartrates out of solution. So there's potassium in wine, there's tartaric acid in wine, and the two, potassium and tartaric acid, will bind together to form potassium bitartrate. Getting the wine cold below freezing will drop that out of solution, and then you have to rack off of that. So you need a cold tank, or at least a cold room. You need a cold tank or a cold room. I mean, a cold tank is probably easier, but it's just a glycol chiller. So it's a tank with a glycol jacket. You turn that glycol chiller on, it gets the tank, just below freezing, and tartrates will drop out of solution. And what's important is you have to rack off from it. So if you just get your wine cold in a tank and you say, okay, it's dropped out of solution, everything's fine now, and you warm it back up without racking, those tartrates you just dropped out of solution will dissolve back into the wine. You see, that's chemistry. You have to rack off when you cold stabilize. You can't just get your tank cold and then heat the tank back up, because everything you just dropped out of solution will then disassociate and dissolve back in solution, and your wine is just where it started. So if you're going to cold stabilize, remember, cold stabilize your tank below freezing for a couple weeks, rack it, and then you can heat it back up. You have to rack it while the things are dropped out of solution. Heat stabilization for that bentonite. If you're using bentonite, you're making your wine heat stable. As simple as that. Sometimes a heavier dosage is needed to really heat stabilize it, but when you remove proteins, so bentonite removes proteins. When you remove proteins from solution, you're heat stabilizing the wine, because proteins will disassociate at higher temperatures. And what I mean by higher temperatures is like 80, 90 Fahrenheit, in that range somewhere. If you get wine too hot, it'll throw protein haze. These proteins they denature, they become cloudy, they become hazy. And bentonite is a good way to get rid of that. So just clarifying with bentonite, which again is very common. Every cellar I've ever worked in has used bentonite. If you're using bentonite, you're making your wine heat stable, just an added benefit. So clarify with bentonite, you remove the proteins, you can heat your wine up to, hot, and it's not going to throw protein haze because there's no proteins in solution, you see. So that's heat stability, that's cold stability. Again, not really fining action, but just added benefits of the wine. And with that, I think that brings us to the end. Thank you again. Aaron Essery, State Extension Specialist, B&E. That's my office phone and my email. Please call or email anytime you need. And with that, I will kill the recording and we will open it up to questions. So thank you very much.